All right, Pat, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it getting the opportunity to sit down with you. Um, I hope we go through some interesting things. I had a lot I want to ask you, and of course,
Okay.
I've known you for years now,
Yeah.
and never we kind of commingled in a professional relationship. It's always just been personal meet up, have some lunch, and things of that nature. So I was excited. I did have the opportunity to read your most recent release,
Okay.
Terra Sabbath, which is definitely a heavy read. I'm someone who's
It's
big into horror.
It's a heavy read.
Heavy read as far as like the the way that imagery comes across, and knowing you personally and what you went through and some of your experiences,
Yeah.
the undertones that are in there. So, but before we dive into all that,
Okay.
why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing now, where you're at, what's your most recently been working on?
Okay. Okay. This was not planned to be a trilogy, but I'm in the third book of it now. So it's a trilogy.
Okay.
And I'm working on the third one now. It's going to be scheduled to be published in October. I'm going to get it to the publisher in the next few months here since the draft is almost ready. I'll start polishing that up.
Okay.
But the name of that one is The Harlot and the Beast. And these three novels really focus on a central villain, the protagonist, central villain. Her name is Terra Drake. And she really is what I think is the metaphor of all addiction. And it doesn't matter what it could be. It could be sex, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol. And as you've known me, Bon, for so many years, I struggled. I was an alcoholic. I am an alcoholic. And I'll be 8 years sober this June. So we've not been that long. And before that, though, I was in and out of jails and rehabs and going through a world where I lost everything. And Terra Drake came out of all places in prison, in a prison rehab. Ended up writing a short story of all things, and just an awful environment, just the worst that you can think of. And as I was going through my life and what was happening with me, I wrote this short story, and of all things, Terra Drake in that short story was the kind of the embodiment of sexual addiction. Because a lot of folks inside prison get involved in whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever it can be. It always goes into broken relationships and torn up relationships. And so I was thinking through all this and of all places and came up with this character. And that first story was actually published in 2019. It's called She, but that's where she came from, Terra Dragon. My wife always wanted me to write a book that told the story of all of these characters and things I've gone through in these. I would call them demons that you face as an addict.
Yeah, the book there picks literal demons, right?
It is. The books are literal demons. They truly are. But I've taken a lot of the experiences of going through the real horrors of alcoholism and turned them into these characters. And it's been incredibly therapeutic to do that. It really has. But I've always had a gift for writing, and I've written my whole life professionally. I've been a professional writer my whole life, except for when I met you.
That's a lot. I mean, to go through. There's so much to unpack there.
There is.
So
There is.
let's start with the beginning. Like, what ultimately, when I'm someone who's really naive to dealing with addiction and what an individual has to persevere and go through, I've definitely seen and listened to stories of people be successful and turn their life around.
Right.
And then vast majority of us have witnessed individuals who addiction has ridden them totally into the ground.
Yeah.
So with you, do you know like what the origin point was? Was there exposure to you sound like primarily alcoholism?
That was my drug of choice, and in recovery, you'll hear addicts and alcoholics say that. The common term is drug of choice. Mine was always alcohol.
Okay.
But it did take me to a road where I was into everything.
Yeah.
It became really bad that way.
So why do you think that is? What were some of the initial life experiences that led you on down that road to where you became this individual who relied heavily on alcohol?
I can tell you exactly what happened. I was in high school, and it was an event, it was a concert of all things, a Black Sabbath concert.
Okay.
I really wanted to go. My dad was kind of against it because Black Sabbath was in our family, it was a heavy type of rock music that he's just, you can't go and do that. But we went to this concert, and I was with a group of 7 or 8 of us that kind of hung out through my school together. And I remember they were drinking, and I had a 7 and 7, a Seagram 7 and 7 out. And I remember I drank that all night long, and it didn't do to me what it did to everybody else. And I'm not a big guy at all, I'm a smaller guy. And I'm with all my friends that love them my size up to your size, and it just didn't really bother me. And I realized, what was this about? I didn't know, of course. And it didn't really take at that point either. But I can look back now and say that was different. Alcohol for me was just something that was just different. I could handle it, and it was enjoyable, and I could just keep going with it.
Yeah.
But it didn't really hit me until when I was out of graduate school and I was working for my very first professional writing job. I was working for a technology company, and I had gone through a divorce, and I had met some different people that were not part of my lifestyle at all. I met a woman and got married to her, of all things, kind of a relapsed marriage, if you will. But that's so it started.
Had you been divorced prior, or it was a relapse marriage?
I was married right out of high school, very, very young.
Okay.
And that marriage lasted 5 years, and it wasn't good in a lot of ways, that marriage. And when it ended, I met some other people. I met another lady, and I got married to her way too quickly. But she was a partier. She really enjoyed that lifestyle, and I got into that lifestyle. And that's when it really, really became terrible. Within a few years with her, I was drinking constantly, and I was going into the different worlds of alcohol and drugs that it took me. That marriage didn't last long at all. And after that marriage, I kind of moved from job to job, always relying on my education, always relying on the ability to write, kind of talk my way out of things. I always thought every time I got in trouble that I was going to be okay, I'd be able to get out of it. But the very first time, Eric, that I got in trouble was back in 1996, and I was on a business trip in Kansas, of all places, and I was arrested. We went out, the team that I was with, we went out and just shooting pool and so on. But I remember leaving the club, and I was pulled over because I was weaving in and out. And that was the first time I was arrested. And I only spent the night in jail. It was a small town. And after I was bailed out by the director of the marketing team that was with us, and I remember her looking at me and seeing what had happened. And she was also probably very much like you, hadn't seen this kind of trouble or danger, if you will, problems.
Yeah.
And she said, well, what if we sit here right now, we pray, and you release all of your sins, and I can hear them, and you can be saved. And
that's got to be a wild offer.
It was
especially
I didn't know what to say.
Were you in that type? So
no,
just to understand your background.
I wasn't into religion at all.
Okay, or even that type of headspace where you were some of these receptive to that.
I was not receptive to it at all. And I look back and there's part of me that wishes I would have listened to her a little bit more, because she saw things that were going on that I didn't see, of course, but it didn't take. It really didn't. And after that marriage ended, then things just started to spiral. They really did. And I was in and out of jails, and I was in and out of rehabs. I got married again, and that didn't take. And just trying to kind of find my way in what I was doing. But every time I got in trouble, I always would think, well, for one, I made plenty of money, so I could always rely on that. That began to go away, spend everything. And I always thought I could talk my way out of it or think my way through it, and never really realized if I was an alcoholic or not. I didn't ever say that I was. I didn't believe it. There were times when I got out of jail, or rehab, I would go right back to it, think to myself I could handle it, I could take care of it. But all those times, they never really took. And it doesn't have to go that way. It never has to go to that level of going in and out and not having some kind of light go on and say, hey, you burned every bridge now. And that didn't happen to me until 8 years ago in Park City. And I came up to Utah. I left Texas. My father drove me up there. I was living with him, of all things. I was living with my parents because I lost everything there. My parents were at their end of the road too. So I came up here to Utah, and my parents needed me to look after my grandmother on my mom's side, and I didn't have family or children. I didn't have anything. So that was kind of what happened. And about a year in Utah, I met a lady who I'm married to now, my wife, Lisa, and I went to Park City and got in trouble there, of all things. And
I'm assuming this was alcohol related again.
This was alcohol related again, yeah. And I remember, Eric, when I was in court that time, and Lisa agreed to help me get an attorney. Because I'd blown everything through all of the different programs I'd been in, and didn't have anything left. And I remember the attorney was in the court with me at Park City, and he came out after all of my record had been displayed to the judge.
Yeah.
And I was looking at years and years in prison. And it would have been over. And it's a little emotional, but I can remember him telling me, I can get you into one more program. And Lisa and I did it. We went into this program again. It was 18 months program. And Eric, again, in that program, I started to float through it. I thought, once again, I'll just use my wisdom and talents and education and just kind of wheel my way out of it.
Yeah, just listening to your story.
And you had met me during this time.
Yeah. Well, and just listening to your story, I could see the pattern already starting to develop as you're talking.
Yeah.
Your education and your skills and abilities were consistently favoring you out. So I can understand how you want to rely on that. So you were there again.
I was there again. And I was a year into the program. Looking at graduating and getting a whole thing, what they call it, or getting your certificate. And I had a person ask me one time, how many times is taking alcoholic to finally realize who they are, what they are? How long does it take? How many programs? How many times? And I had a counselor in this last program. Her name is Dodie Wilson, and I'm still in touch with her to this day. And she told the group that I was involved with during this last program, it takes about 7 average times, a combination of arrest, jail, rehab, and the whole thing, to really have someone become long time in sobriety, long term. And this was my 10th time. And I remember Dodie bringing me into her office, and she sat me down, and she put me on what's called a pause. I didn't have any idea what that was until the next day. And a pause was everything I was doing in the program, whether it's a urinalysis every so often, because they're randomly taken to make sure you're clean, court appearances, all the classes, your entire drug court team, everything that you do in the program to get out and get released, no longer counted. None of it.
So the entire year was a wash?
No, not the entire year was a wash, but from that moment on to get out was no longer counting.
Okay.
And I remember calling up Lisa, telling her this. She was in her boat. She was fed up.
With you?
With the whole program. Yeah, it was just exhausting. Yeah, and expensive. Because I had to find a place in Park City. She had her home in Morgan, back and forth, and so I was only making peanuts working at the hotel at the front desk of all things. And I remember when Dodie did that to me, I went back to that Park City condo. And I remember I went and I fell to my knees. I remember just in anguish telling God, my God, I can't do this anymore. This is it. I drank from that moment on, as we moved forward, I knew as an alcoholic, I knew that I had to stop. I was committed to changing everything about me. Friendships, relationships, people I knew in the past, and I was committed to never taking another drink again, ever. And I remember Lisa and I going through this emotional, and I went to her too, and I just broke down. And I knew for a fact that what my counselor did, what Dodie did, was exactly what I needed to hear, because all the other options were gone. Before that time, I never knew if I would ever write again professionally, have a living anymore. I thought it was all gone for good. But that's the moment that happened. And it was a remarkable thing. To this day, I attribute Dodie for doing that with me. And she's still in touch with me to this day. She's just very remarkable. She's just one support system, though. She's one of the best ones. And my wife, Lisa. But along that journey, Eric, you've been instrumental as a friend. I've met people in the Ogden area. I've met a dear friend, Dave Foley, who owns Foley's Mixed Martial Arts. He's been a mentor, a coach, a dear friend, helping me through tough times as the years go on. And because staying sober requires managing it. I've met friends at work that have been remarkable. My publisher, Terry Rice, when I first submitted the very first book, The Lady Mephistopheles, I had several publishers that were looking at it. And a couple had offered contracts and a couple rejected it. But I really liked this publisher because he was so good working with authors and how he made them better. And he rejected the book at first. He did. He wrote it and he said that the language is heavy, that's the story. I don't know if the style will work. I'm going to have to take a pass on it.
Well, the language is heavy.
It is.
And that's what's interesting about your book and knowing your struggle. You are really trying to give the reader this sense of addiction. And knowing you, I knew that.
Right.
It was very much in the reading and in the imagery, in the scenes, and some of the pivotal scenes that I heard in Terra, Sabbath.
Right.
The dining scene was incredibly interesting.
That's a
the diner scene, I
Right.
thought was incredibly interesting. The characters and the way that was laid out. And then the reoccurring themes of alcohol and sex addiction
Right.
that were laden throughout that book. So that's some really heavy material.
It is. And the first book kind of hits on it more in the alcohol part.
Okay.
And when Terry sent that rejection letter to me, I wrote him back and I said, can you please reconsider? Because I gave him more of the story and I said, I think we had something. I think it's unique. And I read so much. I'm well educated enough to know that there's stories out there that are similar or not. And this was, I thought I would share with him something that was, I think, quite different. And he said, okay, let's do it. So he worked with me and we did some different things at the ending and changed some things, I think, all for the better. And it did well. He has 49, 50 authors, and it did really well. And then we did the second one, Terra Sabbath, and last year, that was the top selling book of all of his authors. It's incredible. What an honor to have that.
Yeah.
And now we're on the third one. And over the years with these 3 books, he has been instrumental in developing me as an author in fiction, but also the friendship that he's been with me and to my family. But those are some of the support things, and you have to be able to look back and say thank you to these people, how much they've meant to you. My wife, what she's meant to me as this entire struggle, she's always encourages me to keep going and to keep writing. Maybe one of these will hit the market one day with a screenplay. You never know what can happen.
Sure.
But she always has believed in me that way and has told me, you're such a gifted writer. You have to at least try and resonate with someone out there. And I think that is also something that drives me. If these stories and these books can hit someone and they can say, well, I don't want to experience that, or I have experienced that. And if that happens, then that's a win for everybody too. But the themes of these books have come out because of the things I've been able to overcome, I think. And it's just been a huge honor to have that happen and to be published that way and to see it take off. My work has increased.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it was just interesting that you talked about the honor, or more so watching it take off, and the idea of where you were at,
Right.
and what you had to do in order to get out. So you had that awakening moment,
Right.
but from that awakening moment, it didn't just turn, did it? It didn't really.
It did emotionally.
Okay.
It really
And
did.
that made everything else easy.
Everything else was hands and knees crawling for every morsel at times.
Right.
Every dollar. Every
Because
friendship.
that's the time in which I met you. And
Yes.
that's why it's interesting, because
That's when you met
knowing
me.
where you're at now versus where you were, like you mentioned, in a position where you were just doing it to keep yourself fed.
Yes,
So
and because it was required, the judge said you got to get a job. And I was in Park City, and our boss at the time, Jonathan, and the owner of Hotel Park City, hired me, and I met you, but I was in a terrible spot then. I really was. I was in a terrible spot.
So what did you do? What actions did you take? So when you go from on your knees, like having a breakdown and having this moment, this epiphany, where you are consoling with yourself and speaking to your God, as you said, and going through this moment, then what's the next step? What did you do the next day? Did you just get up and have breakfast and go?
The next day you start digging in. I started to realize the depths of alcoholism, what it was. Doing all the research, doing all the classes, listening to people, and humbling myself. I had such a horrible arrogance about me for so many years.
So you got away with it for so long.
I did. I relied on so many things that didn't have any meaning. And I had to try something different. And I learned about alcoholism. I learned about addiction. I learned that it's a physiological thing. It's for me to take a drink would be much different than for you to take one. It would be a literal reaction, an allergic reaction is how the AA book calls it.
Okay.
Where it would just overtake your body eventually. I can tell you right now with a doubt in my mind, Eric, if I took a drink tonight, in a matter of months, it would be over. In a matter of months. That's what it would do to me. And I didn't know that before. And I learned about that, and my wife was with me, and we debated and battled, and we worked through these things. But I also didn't quit with my career. I knew that I had a talent, whether it was technical writing or fiction or speaking in public. I really knew that I had that. I just persevered, and I kept going at it. I kept fighting it. I kept putting out resumes. I kept overcoming the rejection after rejection after rejection. I'll tell you a story here about my current position.
Okay.
When COVID hit, I was working with a doctor in Houston. His name is Dr. Masson. I was working with him on medical papers and medical writing. And at the same time, I was working with another company that focused on recovery. It developed software applications for those that get out of jail and rehab so that they could plug in real time on their phone or their iPad or their computer. They could plug into their treatment team. So in 2019, 2020, I was working for both of those places incredibly. Then COVID hit, and in 2 months, I lost both of those positions. They were gone. And I looked at Lisa, I talked to my brothers, because I'd earned their trust again. And within 3 weeks, this position I had now at Microsoft and Mindtree landed in my lap. And I was hired on as the lead of the technical writing program for mixed reality. And you see these miracles happen, and you stay the course, you stay true to what you know is going to work for you as an alcoholic. And it's being honest, it's being transparent, but it's also reeling in that arrogance and throwing it away.
So that's interesting. in particular with arrogance, you keep referring back to because you had the success and you went through that. As someone who isn't as familiar with the idea of a heavy addiction like that, like you said, that it's nearly like a physical reaction or what did you say specifically as far as what you learned in regard to addiction and alcohol addiction, why you're reacting differently, say, than someone else? Is you have a genetic predisposition to it?
Correct.
Okay. So now you're walking around every day,
Right.
8 years past that point, and where you're sitting here saying in this seat right now that if you were to have a drink of alcohol, a few months would be over for you.
It would be.
What is that like? Carrying that.
It's a heavy weight. It is. And I can tell anyone out there who's suffering with alcohol, suffering with drugs, you cannot do it alone. There is no way. You have to have God, a God in your life. You have to submit to that. But you have to rely on your friends and your family. You have to rely on those that really care about you. For example, my brothers, I lost their trust and love when I was so deep in my addiction. Now I rely on them almost daily. Josh, my brother Josh, who is the character in Terra Sabbath, he's married.
Okay.
He's the catalyst for so much of these books, and I rely on him for the legal expertise, of course, too. But he is marrying Paul in that book. That's Josh, and my brother Mike. And
I'd probably like to hang out with Josh.
You would,
because maybe probably an interesting
Very
character.
glad he's cool, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he has a lot more adventures in his next book coming up. But if you don't rely on those pillars, and I think they are pillars. You have friendships, you have family, you have your spirituality, and you have physical fitness and your health. I think those four things. Because when you are
So
about
again,
to turn shape,
what are your pillars again?
physical fitness, spirituality, friendships, and family. And I think for me anyway, and I know a lot of alcoholics like this as well, and long-term sobriety, you knock out one of those pillars and you're on the three-legged thing again, and it tips over a lot more easily. I think that's the way I've always thought about it. And I have those four things really solid right now, and I rely on them daily. I really do. And if I see one of them slipping, I'll notice it, or a friend will notice it. I've had some friends call me out on things, like Foley, for example. They Foley call me out on things about boundary issues. I'll have my wife call me out on things. I'll have my brothers. I'll have people at work say, "Hey, what's going on? I'm noticing something here," and so I can catch that now quickly and make a correction. Whereas before, I just couldn't do it. I didn't care.
Yeah. So essentially, these pillars, if I'm understanding it correctly, are anchoring you to this new lifestyle.
They are.
And keeping you away from that addiction.
They are.
So they're critical.
I think they're beyond critical. They're part of the lifestyle. They have to be part of the lifestyle. And I tell you one thing that drives my wife crazy sometimes is I'm really routine driven. And if something knocks me out of the routine, I feel it. I really do. I'm up every morning very, very early. I work out every single day. I train every night with the martial arts and boxing and with weights and running. And every day I work on my scripture reading. I focus on that. I work very hard at work. I work on my relationships at work. And I work on my book. I take time out for that too. I eat as well as I know how to. I'm very rigid on that as well, my diet. And I notice that when I travel or if Lisa and I go on a trip, or if we even do some things differently on a weekend, and I see things like family, for example, comes and visit at Christmas time or so on, and it knocks you out of a routine, it really affects me.
Well, so it's interesting. That would make sense. Just listening to your story since we've been here is that previously routines give control.
They do.
And they give you or a semblance of control.
Right.
And make you feel as if control and what to anticipate next and reducing anxiety.
It's true.
Whereas it sounds like previously you were 8 years prior and earlier, you
Right.
were nearly running your life completely out of control.
Out of control.
So I would assume
There was a train wreck.
there's a strong parallel for you between the notion of having control and routine and maintaining sobriety. And then as soon as the routine becomes disrupted, the potential to go back.
It is there.
So tell me a little bit about that. Like, that's
It's
got to be
there.
an active thing you think about.
It is an active thing. And an interesting point about that, Aaron, is this. I know I'll tell the audience this as well. I think it will resonate with people. But this past year has been the most difficult year for me to stay sober. Of all the successes that I've had, this has been the toughest year. Aaron, I remember Dodie one time telling me that after 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of sobriety, you're going to come across a point where it's going to be very hard. For whatever reason. She said the number one trigger is anger. Anger will set off an alcoholic and addict to relapse more than anything, or despair. And I haven't had despair so much as I have in the past, of course, but I've really struggled with anger. I have. There's been some events that have happened in family since last Thanksgiving that have happened on both sides of the family that have caused some upsets with me that I've had to really check myself and make sure I stay true to my pillars, true to my God, and maybe when I'm wrong, telling people, hey, I'm sorry, and I lost my temper, and I've done that way too often. And I don't know why that this has been such a challenging year. I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. I take that back. One reason, I'm older now. I sometimes look at myself in the mirror, see myself on video, because my work is still all remote. It didn't change since the pandemic changed everything. Mine has remained that way. A lot of times I'll see myself on video, or I'll look at myself and I'll see, I don't have a lot more left at this level. I think that. It might be all nonsense, but I see it. I feel it. And that way is on at times. And it gets emotional because I want to look back at times and say, I had all of this that I lost, that I wish I could give to my wife now. I wrote for NASA of all places and lost all of that. And I sometimes will get in this pity party, and I'll look at my age and I'll think, how long do I have at this level? How long can I continue this? I guess ambition that I outwork so many people. I'm up for, I probably sleep 3, 4 hours a night. That's it. How long can I sustain this level of drive?
Yeah.
Right now, I feel fine. I just think I can do it forever. But there are times when I see myself and wonder, well, what if? And it's on your mind a lot. And I got to keep focused on those important things, the friendships, the family, the spirituality, keeping myself strong mentally and physically, working out is so critical of it.
So in those questions you posed yourself, what kind of answers are you getting back?
This past year, I get too many times on the shoulder, you're running out of time. And it is sometimes it's overwhelming. It is. I'll talk to Lisa not too many times. I'll talk to Josh. I'll talk to Mike about it. There's times I even talk to Dave about it, or there's times I talk to friends about it. First time I've ever talked to you about it, but it's on my shoulder. I have a career coach. His name is Steve Botter, and he's been remarkable throughout this journey. I'll talk to him about it because he's in the area of seeing people fail in their careers and helping them get back on track.
But let's go back to the question, because I'd like to get this from you. Is when you're going through that, what is the reply that you're giving yourself? When you're asking yourself that question, what are you hearing?
Too many times this year I'm hearing I'm running out of time. I'm hearing that.
So you're getting that
I get that
concern,
feedback.
you're getting that.
I get that thing.
Where do you think that's coming?
It's got to be from fear. It just has to be from fear. Because I'll tell you what overcomes it like that. What overcomes it in a split second almost, sometimes it takes a few minutes. As I'm battling through this past year, what overcomes it is the reality of what happens if I was to take a drink and relapse. That's what overcomes it. Losing everything that I have now, losing this moment, this friendship, losing Lisa, losing Josh again, and Mike again. That, I never want to lose that, ever. So that's what overcomes it. But too many times this has been tapping, and I am really fighting that. It's a real battle with me right now. This third book is helping a lot. I'm creating some characters that are out of control with anger. That helps. But I'm glad you asked it, because that's the truth. I hear that too many times, and it is fear-based. It really is.
So what happens if that's coming to fruition? What happens if you're no longer performing at the level you're currently performing at? And that's a natural, or not even natural, that's a shift that you're going to experience.
Yeah, it will happen.
What is going to happen? So you're talking about your fear.
Right.
Right. And I understand that. There's a change. Anytime there's a change, there's a fear response to it.
There is.
But why fear in response to change? Is it what's going on now? Is it related back to that concern of addiction? Is it?
It is that, but it's also, I think, wanting too often to regain all the things that I had in the past, to provide for my wife, for example, to be able to give to society more of all I took, all I destroyed. And this fear, I think when that shift really happens, as I get older and older, that it has to be a spiritual thing too. I have to turn to my God, because when it becomes that big, I can't overcome that without a more powerful element than who I am. And that is a God. That's a God thing. And that does provide a lot of peace. It really does. I think talking this out right now provides a remarkable amount of peace. It really does, because I'm able to, you're making me face this, and it can feel better when you do that. It really can. I didn't have the curse do that even maybe a couple of years ago. But yeah.
Well, in you facing it, and we're recording and going through this process, but what we're doing is sharing it with other people.
We are.
Other paths, other areas.
There's a lot of people out there. Yeah.
So know and understand that if it's not today, it may be years in the future where someone else watches this and can identify with it.
Right.
So that's the reason, another reason why I bring it up is we naturally go through a period of hitting our peak and then what we consider a decline as far as a productivity.
Right.
But when you look at it from the perspective of only, let's use a tree instead of a person, one tree and its ability to bear fruit.
Right.
But we forget about the fact that the tree drops seeds, and those seeds become additional trees.
We do forget about that.
And so that's
way too often.
Right. And so the tree that's now withering away, I wonder if it ponders to realize it's responsible for growing a forest. And that's really its legacy. The legacy is not in the individual tree.
Right.
The legacy is in the forest that it has become a part of, and that it has helped greatly fruition.
I think it's a great metaphor. I do. And I think also that hits another part of me that I've struggled with in the past. I never had children. I never had the blessing of having children. And so I don't have that to bring forth who I am right now. I've even talked to Lisa about that. And you know what she'll tell me? She'll say, your book, that is your legacy. Your writing, you're going to touch people that way. That's going to be your forest.
Yeah, well,
that's really cool.
You talk about, you coach, you train. You work with people there.
I work with people there. I work with Dave Foley and the teenagers and kids there in boxing and jiu-jitsu. It's giving out that way. I try to be a good example of sobriety. I try to be a very good big brother now that I was never before. I have a sister. Her name's Joelle. She's also recovering. She's done remarkable over the past year staying clean. So I try to be a better husband. I try to be a better friend. And I try to be a better son. And those are things, Eric, in the past that I never cared about. They just didn't matter. What mattered to me was not being comfortable in my own skin because I never was, because I had the bottle, or I had the line, or I had the joint, or I had something that I would go to constantly to protect me from how people looked at me and saw me. And I don't have that now. I have this guy, I have those pillars. Those are tough to build. They really are. And once you build them, they're remarkable.
I say, do they feel pretty solid?
They do. They feel very solid. Even with this past year, going through this,
well,
they're anchoring me. They are.
Obviously, right?
They are.
You're still here. You're having the conversation from the position of continuing to lead sobriety.
Yeah.
As opposed to
quitting,
not being here.
Right. Right. You're exactly right. I think one of the most painful things that I can share with the audience is how many alcoholics and addicts I've seen personally who do quit and give up and don't make it. As a matter of fact, in the group that I was originally with when I was arrested in Park City, I am the only one who has remained sober out of that whole group. And I keep in touch with Dodie. I keep in touch with all people. My probation officer back then, his name was John Evans, and John, I keep in touch with him. And they tell me, you're the only one out of this whole group. And that's what it is like in the whole country. You get these big groups who want to succeed or want to stay sober, but they simply do not do the work. They don't do the effort. And I don't think they have the system in place. They don't have, because you can't do this alone. I say that 100 times. They may not have the spirituality. They may not have the friendships. They may not have the work or the skill set to rely on. They may not have a healthy lifestyle, or a decent diet to fall back on. They may not have any of these. And many times, I think the number one thing they feel is a loss of hope. They feel that despair. Dodie was talking about those two things that can cause relapse: anger and despair. That's one of the biggest ones, is despair.
Yeah, just listening to your story and then your ability to even have 9 strikes through your lifetime.
That's what they were.
And I gotta assume though, Pat, it was so based on your talent and your education.
It was solely based on that. It was.
So how does an individual, if they didn't have that talent or they hadn't had that exposure, they're in the same position, what are some of the key things you think that, in going through the process, what are some of the key things you think that could give them the opportunity to get themselves out?
I think number one is, we talked about arrogance a lot. I think humility. If an alcoholic or an addict can let go of all the arrogance that they have so got inside of them, and it's remarkable when you're inside of a rehab place or a jail. It's astonishing to see the level of arrogance everybody around you has, and these are all people that have nothing. They're broken, destroyed lives, but they're filled with this arrogance. I think if a person loses that and deeply searches within themselves to humble and to listen and to find out who they are, that's step one. I think the second step is putting in the effort, working towards being sober. If it requires going to groups, if it requires going to AA, if it requires going to church all the time, whatever will tend you away from that element of addiction, find that and rely on those who are sober, those who have been through it. People like me, there's so many of it, there's a lot of us out there. I will help anybody out there who's struggling with addiction, anybody, anytime. And I mean that. And I wasn't able to do that before. But if a person who doesn't have a skill set, perhaps, or education, there's still plenty of people out there that have survived it and done well. My sister is an example. She doesn't have that. She's sober, she's clean, she's working through it. And it's because she humbled herself. She admitted it, she broke down, she lost. And that's the way to do it. That really is.
You think that triggers, or it's triggered that moment is obviously different for each person?
It is.
And how many times it takes? Like, you're pretty resilient. I got to give you that. You're pretty resilient when it comes to that.
I will answer it this way. I can tell the audience it does not have to go to the level I did. It doesn't have to. You don't have to go to jail. You don't have to go to rehab. I think rehab is a far more fluid thing in an addict's life. It's just a far more healthy thing. But I can promise you don't have to have a career, let's say NASA, and lose every dime that you have. You don't have to do that.
You've kind of hit on that story a few times. That's an interesting story. What occurred?
I think I can only talk about it now, going through this with so many years. But I walked into my office one day at NASA, and I had a gun on me and a knife, and I thought I just bought it. I was showing it around to some of my colleagues, and there were some people there too. What the hell's this? I was fired that day. Walked off campus that day.
Were you intoxicated when you were
Yes.
there?
Yeah, I was.
And it just seemed like
I don't even know if I was up. It was alcohol, and I think it was Xanax, of all things. I was hitting that hard back then, but absolutely, it was drug related. Couldn't see the things were right in front of my nose, and that's a story that Lisa would like me to share real quick. There was a rehab I went to one time where there was a nurse there, and he looked at me one time and said, "You know what, Pat? You can't see your finger. You can't see how beautiful it is right in front of you this way. Your finger's on your nose, everything's blurry and it's slanted. That's where you are." And that was a poignant moment. There's all these poignant moments that happen, whether it's jail or rehab or going through it, that change things.
Yeah. Is it Doty or Doty? I can Doty. The interesting thing when you're telling your story and how Doty put you on that pause.
Yes.
What was it that they saw in you that they knew you were kind of like a fox in a hen house with this program you're in?
I think it's the best question in this entire interview we've done together, because it goes back to arrogance. Doty looked at me. She said, "Yeah, all the material, the classes, all the books, all the papers, it's nothing for you. This is going to do it for you." The arrogance, the lack of honesty, no humility, or all these talents and gifts. You shit on everybody. You've thrown them out the door. That's what it is. So it did hard. I will have emotions about that to my grave because of how real it was and is.
Yeah. So you were able, essentially,
She saw that.
you were skating through the
Skating
program
through it again.
because of your intelligence and your ability.
Yeah.
And
She said, "No, it's not gonna. We're not gonna do that way with you."
it was masking your addiction and what was probably
It was.
going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously that's why you stay in contact with Doty. I would almost consider her someone who saved my life.
Yeah.
Or
She's
who watched her
instrumental. Doty and Lisa.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My wife, Lisa, did save my life at a time.
She obviously put in a lot of work.
She
That's for sure. It sounds
She
like
did.
she made it possible.
Absolutely.
A few times you've mentioned faith in your belief system. I know it's different for everyone, but as someone who grew up, not a religious person, there was plenty of devout, different religions that were around me.
Right.
I didn't have much experience. My parents chose not to take me to a church. So most of my life, I really was uninvolved.
Right.
However, I had an experience around the birth of my daughter that completely changed I don't even know it's my mind, but my being about
Right.
some kind of
Makes sense.
interconnectedness and some type of, people want to say spiritual, but this interconnectedness that exists and almost this divinity in the sense that I feel like.
I understand that.
I had an incident where it literally washed over me and I understood that I had previously been wrong in like an instant.
Right.
So,
At this moment, yeah.
so tell us a little bit about your faith system and where it comes from. And you had mentioned you weren't necessarily someone who was considered a faithful or a religion follower in your incidents with the woman.
I wasn't with her. With that, there was a second marriage. I wasn't with that at all.
Or no, in the woman who tried to counsel you after the event? Were you?
Yes, I was not. I was not at all. But I grew up with a family. My parents were very devout members of the LDS Church, the
Okay.
Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. And I grew up with that. And when I was growing up, I felt it was probably too much, and I had to go on my own, and I did for a long, long time. I still am a member of that faith, and I hold dearly to the doctrine of that. I do. I believe in Jesus Christ, and that is my God. And through the depths with Him, I'll say that. That's my foundation spiritually. And I'm not a churchgoer. I'm not. These are things that I just know in my heart for me work, and Christian life works. My wife is Catholic. I've grown to adore her faith in that, and it works for her. And I find that whatever religion or faith base you have, or the spiritual kind of awakening you may have with your daughter, those are things that I feel through my own faith and belief. But it's the same thing. It's the same feeling. And it's that knowledge that someone is there far bigger and far more understanding that can help you through it. I think that's pivotal in addiction. It really is. Because addiction's it's too big. Alcoholism is too big. And any person who tries to succeed long-term sobriety without a belief in a God of something is not going to make it. I can promise you that.
We always hear the adage of people saying things like, "That's my cross to bear," in relation to, in particular, Christianity.
Right.
But just hearing your conversation and mixing the two, I see now how the idea of addiction, where it is something that never leaves you. It's an affliction that never leaves you. And every single day is an active choice on your point to be this current version of Pat.
It is. It will be something I'll take to my grave with me. Every addict and alcoholic I'll tell out there, this is part of who you are. My alcoholism is the same thing with someone who has diabetes or someone who was diagnosed with HIV. It's the same thing. I have to manage it with my tools and my medicines that work for me, those 4 pillars. But it will be something I have to manage for the rest of my life, and to acknowledge that and accept it, that's also key. It doesn't make me a weaker person. It's just what I have. It's the element that I have on my plate that I have to manage and respect it.
Yeah.
You have to.
Every single day. Pat, I just want to thank you for giving us a brief. I'm sure we can go into even individual stories. I mean, with so many instances and run-ins with the law and the things that you have.
Sure, these books will talk about.
And personally, the success that you then had as well, due to your intelligence and your background and your skills and abilities that constantly kind of bailed you out of those situations. Yeah, it's impressive.
So having me here talk about it.
Yeah, it's good. And again, your books. I'm really excited to hear this third one that comes on. What's the title of
the title? Is The Harlot and the Beast.
Okay.
It'll come out in October. My website's deanpatrickhorror.com.
Okay.
The publisher is twpress.com, and those are places to get my books and look at things and see the stories and find out what I am as an author. It's exciting. It's a lot of fun.
Excellent. Is there anything now going through this process and again, knowing kind of like our audience and what we're trying to develop for people who are trying to make changes for themselves and the people who are trying to persevere. Besides, in relation, you talked about the idea of an addiction and getting a support system. Is there any last words of advice you'd give out to those individuals there who are looking to go from where you were 8 years ago to where you are now, and how you did that?
I would say immediately go to Alcoholics Anonymous. Go find a group. Go find a charter, because you can walk in there completely inebriated, completely on whatever your drug of choice is, and there will be someone there who understands, who's done it, who's seen it, and will talk to you and listen and will help you. But I think the number one thing for someone who is first gotten in trouble with the law or has realized that they're in this, to ask for help, because it is there. Because if you don't, then no one's going to know. There's not going to be someone like me out there to say, I'll help you. There's not going to be a Dodie Wilson out there to say, well, I'll help you, but you have to be arrested first. No, that's how I met her. But she has her own practice. But please reach out for help. That's the number one thing, because it is there. It really is.
Well, again, I want to thank you for your time today. This was excellent. Getting a little deep dive into more about you.
I appreciate
We
it.
obviously wish you the best of success and look forward to the third book of the trilogy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thanks.
Follow, share, like, subscribe. If you want to get in contact again with Pat, you will link his website and materials on the bottom of this video, so you can get a direct link to his publisher or where the books are purchased and more information. So thank you so much for watching today. Have a great rest of your day.